Good afternoon from Barcelona. My name is Mike Rosenberg. I'm a professor of strategy at IESE Business School. Good morning if you're in the United States. It's, I think, 10 o'clock in the morning in New York, and it's a little bit early in California. And good evening if you're in Asia. I believe it's 10 o'clock in the evening in Shanghai. We try to get this broadcast at a time when most people can join. And I see that we've already got people from around the world on the broadcast. So welcome, everybody. Um, Today we've got Pedro Videla with us. Pedro was actually on the second webinar we did for the Alumni Association way back on the 9th of March. The first one was on the 5th of March. And Pedro, you talked to us a little bit about the economic impact of this thing we call a black swan all the way back in March. Today is if I get it right, the 21st of the series that we've been doing. So Pedro, welcome back on our series of webinars.
Hi, Mike. Hello, everybody. Thanks for having me again here. I remember it was a long time ago when we didn't know the huge impact of this crisis. But you mentioned something about a black swan, Mike. Can you explain to us what is a black swan? What is all about that?
Yes, it's a black swan. There's a book by Nassim Taleb way back in 2007, and he talked about a black swan. The idea is swans are supposed to be white. Later, they found out that there are actually black swans in Tanzania, but the idea that something that you never see is a black swan. And he said black swan events are enormous. They have enormous impact, and when they happen, everybody's surprised. But then after they happen, everybody says, "Well, we shouldn't have been so surprised because we knew this was going to happen."
Mm.
In fact, in today's New York Times, Tom Friedman he quotes a guy called Adam Swiden, an ecologist, who says it's really a black elephant, because it's as big as a black swan, but it's kind of like the elephant in the room. And reality is, the world, or the people who paid attention to this stuff, knew that a pandemic like this would happen. The WHO did exercises on it in 2018. They called it Disease X. Bill Gates gave a TED talk about it in 2015, saying we're not ready for this outbreak, and we weren't ready. So it really is a black swan because it's big, it's exceeded all of our expectations in terms of the impact it's had, and we really weren't expecting it, even though some of the experts did. Now, Pedro, if we talk about the impact, and for those of you who've been watching the series, this is going to be a little different because I'm going to ask Pedro some questions. He's going to ask me some questions. And if you're on LinkedIn, if you're on the Vanguardia, or if you're on YouTube, we welcome your comments and your suggestions. If you do have questions to us, please type them into the comment feed. And we have Sabrina Voss from our Alumni Association. She's watching all three feeds, and she's going to type them and send them to me on this device I have in my hand. So please feel free to send your questions to us. But first, Pedro and I are going to ask a few questions to each other, just to kind of get the thing started today. Pedro, how big has the impact been? Because you were on the program when we first started the whole thing, talking about what the impact could be a month and a half ago. Did you have any idea it would be so big then?
No, I didn't have this is huge. This is the 2008, 2009 crisis will be peanuts compared to this. The only thing that I said in that meeting that we had in March, it was what the OECD was saying, that we will go from a growth of the world from 2.9 to 2.4. It seems to me that was extremely way wrong what we have, what we were going to have. And now, 2 weeks ago, the IMF provide us with some estimates, and the IMF claimed that this year, the world GDP won't go from 2.9 to 2.4, will go to minus 3%. In the United States will be minus 6%. In the Euro area will be minus 7.5%. In Spain, minus...
What does that mean in real life? What does minus 3% mean? If I'm running my life and I'm trying to do my stuff, do I care what GDP does?
Yes, because your son or your wife or your husband, if there are somebody else, will go, the high probability will unemployed. This implies 20% unemployment. This implies that the bars that I used to go to have breakfast maybe won't be there tomorrow. Nobody has enough money to be out of business for 3 months. So this is a huge impact on the life of people. What we can do? Well, what we can do, we are throwing in all the monetary ammunition and fiscal ammunition that we had, but the problem is, how do we get to the people that really need it, and not big companies are the ones that get all this money, and not the small and medium enterprises that actually need it out there.
Yeah, we've had Javier Santama from our finance group on the series some weeks ago, and the good news is interest rates are very, very low. So anybody who's basically solvent, I understand from some friends in different companies that the banks are saying, please take our money. We'd love to lend you money. We believe in your project. We believe in you. And since interest rates are zero or close to it, at least it's a good time to borrow money if you have a concrete thing to say.
Yes, but you need to have that's not that easy, because you need to have the stream of income in the future that will come, and that we don't know that will happen. In developing market, in emerging economies, even worse, because we don't have an economy where people have a formal type of income to go and claim for this type of help. So this impact will be huge. Will be huge in everywhere in the world, and that's what we're feeling today. Emerging markets, for example, we will see many countries at the border of going into default. The IMF can help them issuing money, the fake SDRs, the special drawing rights, but United States opposed to have a 1 trillion SDR emission to help this emerging country. So we are in a situation in the world that we have not seen in the last 100 years. We have not seen this huge decline.
Sorry, Pedro, what's an SDR or a fake SDR? I don't know what a real one is, so I don't know what a fake one is.
SDR, special drawing rights, is a weighted average of different currencies, and it's a way how the IMF can lend money that has some value internationally, to emerging markets that are in very tough position to pay the debt. Let me remind you that in this situation, what we see in the world is supply to quality. So the dollar is appreciated against the real, Brazilian real, 25%, against the Mexican peso, almost 20%, against the Argentinian peso, against the Turkish lira, etc., etc., etc. Well, all these countries, they have debt denominated in dollars. So all their liabilities are increasing, all their assets are declining. They won't be able to pay this debt unless we support them. And this is a way how we can support them. It's issuing this fake currency SDR. If the Central Bank of Argentina prints money, won't help to this problem. On the contrary, will make the problem worse. So what we need is this international help to these countries that we are not seeing today.
So, do you think we're going to see it? I mean, is the world going to?
It's very difficult. You mentioned that this was a black swan. Well, it's a black swan, and I totally agree with that. But we have to remember that there are many problems in this world that, although they are black swan, we know that there is a probability that are coming. I guess that was the last Sunday in the Washington Post. They have this nice article that George W. Bush was reading the book Influenza, and he realized, oh, we can have a pandemic. And he called the people and said, we have to be prepared. And in 2006, the American Congress passed a law in order to be prepared for pandemics. Actually, last year, they really renew that law, and they changed the commission as bipartisan commission on biodefense. Nothing happens. We have the thing that.
Well, President Trump, if I remember, Donald Trump closed the office in the National Security Agency.
Yes.
He said we don't need those guys and sent them all home 6 months ago, right?
So this is the problem with this black swan. We know. Maybe you can explain to us. Maybe all the problem of environmental issues like global warming is another black swan that we are having in the future. We claim that we are preparing, but are we preparing, Mike? What's happening?
Well, to be honest, we have not been preparing. We have been talking about it. We passed a fantastic agreement in Paris, which was kind of it wasn't enough, but it was a pathway to get the governments of the world to start reporting what they were doing, and there were going to be increased commitments. And all of that, collectively was going to take us to where we wanted to go. But the truth is we've emitted more carbon in the atmosphere in the last 10 years than in the centuries before that. It's just getting worse and worse and worse.
But
What's really interesting though is that these last 6 weeks have given the planet a break. The carbon emissions are down across the board. Air pollution, nitrous oxide, and other components of air pollution is better. In many cities around the world, you can see the mountains for the first time in a generation. And so there's a question mark. Will this virus get people to kind of say, hey, we want more of that, and get us on a new beginning? Now it's a little bit more complicated, um, because if you think about the climate crisis, one thing that Cristiana Figueres, the Costa Rican diplomat who negotiated the thing in Paris, she said, we're going to start the transition to a low carbon economy either because the world wakes up to do it and will do it, or because the world doesn't do it and the weather's going to get so bad and so weird that in 2030 we're going to wake up and say we have to do it, and it's almost too late. So it's going to happen. The only question is when. But on the other hand, if you think about the economic impact of this crisis and what's going on around the world, the price of oil has dropped. I think I checked it just before the broadcast. It's $20 today for Brent oil, probably 16 or 17 for West Texas Intermediate. And I read that a couple days ago, in the United States, some companies were actually paying people to take their oil supplies because they didn't have any room for it. So oil has dropped to an all-time low. And maybe that is going to make it even more difficult to make the transition, because at the old price, wind and solar and some other technologies were really starting to be competitive in terms of generating power. So we're starting to see a lot of hope, and now we've got both a good story where people saying, wow, the air is clear, I like that, and at the same time we've got the oil price at an all-time low, which maybe encourages business as usual.
Don't we need to prepare for this? We have seen an incredible lockdown. The world GDP is going down sharply. And with all these things, we have seen a decline in the emission just 5%. So we are below the Paris Agreement. So are we willing to pay this price to go to fulfill the Paris Agreement, or do we not really to invest in this low emission new technology? I think this is the time not to say we better do this with new technology, because we cannot kill until 2030 the world has been.
No, of course not. I mean, the way to get there is not by stopping activity. And you're the guy who taught me about, when they write the history of the world someday, it's going to be about hundreds and hundreds of millions of people coming out of poverty. All those people, they want washing machines, and they want cars, and they want electric lights, and they want all of the wonderful things that we take for, we're blessed and we take it for granted here in the West. And as they get all that stuff, their carbon footprint and their energy footprint is going to go up unless we can bring in new technology.
Yes, and so this is a time to maybe not only to invest with this huge fiscal impulse in companies, but to invest and really to have the incentive to go to low carbon type of technology. It's 60% of the emission come from emerging countries. So this is
and Pedro, what other changes do you think? I mean, because with the price of oil so low, with all this other stuff happening, as we come out of the crisis, and I guess we will, someday, will we still have the same economy as we had before, or are there some fundamental shifts in the economy which we're going to see over the next 5 or 10 years as a result of this shock?
Yes. Well, I think that we can look at this in two ways. One is the micro aspect, and the other one is the macro aspect. In the micro size, this pandemic has hurt different industry in a different way. Which are the industries that are most hurt? Are those where proximity is relevant. So this is a huge impact for all those industries that proximity is part of life: bars, cinemas, and all these type of things. So this type of industry will be really hurt. This is this will have a profound income distribution. In United States, I was reading.
You think people won't go back to the movie theaters, so they won't go back to the restaurants?
In the short run, I doubt it. I think that people will be very worried about going out to this type of activities. I doubt it that they will go out to see happily a concert. I doubt that these people will be very worried about all this type of, especially because we don't have data. We don't know the mortality of this virus. So at least in a year and a half, until we have a vaccine that will be available for the people, it's very difficult to think that this type of industry will take off. I was saying that 1/5 of the Americans work in I have it here, in retail, trade, leisure, and hospitality. This number for Spain, it's more than 1/3 of the workers. In Spain, we have more than 400,000 bars, more than the whole United States together. This is a huge impact.
Why does that not surprise me? Pedro, we have a question from from someone who's been watching the whole series, because we had Nuno, our colleague from finance, a couple of weeks ago, presenting some ideas about the economic impact from a model he made, which I thought was alarmist at the time. But what do you think? Were they directionally correct? Do you think we can model this thing, or is it impossible to model it?
No, to know the future is impossible, even to smart economists like Nuno. No, it's not something that. But he's doing intelligent and informed guess, and that's why this is the value of this. We should not take it as a point estimators. It's just a guess where we're going, and the guess was perfect. Was very good. At the time where people were doubting about this huge impact, he would say, if this happened in the next month, for a month, this will be the outcome. And I think that way, it's a very interesting exercise. And we have to say thanks to Nuno for doing it, and to be willing to do it. I didn't want to do it because I recognize that I don't have a clue how to do that. But this is people like Nuno did it, and in a very important way. So it's a very good message, and that's how I clarify what's a.
Okay,
Yes.
so maybe movie theaters and maybe some of the, but in the long term, where are we going to go in 10 years, 15 years? Nuria Mas was on the program saying, the economy is going to shift to Asia. Do you think that's still true?
Yes, it has been shifted to Asia. 60% of the population of the world is in Asia, and this has been during the last 50 years. More than 60% of the GDP is in APEC, Asian and Pacific, including India. So this is a movement to there. What we have to avoid is what's happened at the beginning of last century. At the beginning of last century, we have the demise of the gold standard. Then we have a huge problem with the Bolshevik Revolution. We have the First World War. We have the Great Depression, 1930. And how the world reacted to this? We close up. We eliminated the trade that we had across the world. So what we have to avoid today is that the solution to this problem is to go and impose barriers to trade, to nationalistic view of the world, that this comes from China, I don't want to trade more with China. One thing is to ask China to fulfill what they promised to do when they joined the WTO in 2001. Not to subsidize their company, not intellectual property right, but the other thing is to close the trade with Asia, because that will create huge problem, and the growth of the world that we have enjoyed for the last 30 years, 40 years, it will stop. So, but I understand that there are people that they are coining the idea that we are in the second Cold War, and that the China, it's a winner of this, so we have to stop China about this. But you're the expert in geopolitics. What do you think about this?
Well, the expression "the new Cold War," I actually heard it for the first time from Niall Ferguson, who's a great historian. Although he was at Harvard and I was at Stanford. Although he's become a little bit more right wing, more like one of your friends than one of my friends over the last few years. But Ferguson basically paints it in black and white terms. He says it's about freedom against slavery. It's against openness against closeness. It's about liberty against surveillance. But what I think what we're seeing in this whole context is a tremendous lack of American leadership. For since the end of the Second World War, the United States, for good or for ill, I mean, you can argue about this, but they have had, through the IMF, the World Bank, through the active engagement of the United States with the world, has been to some degree pushing the world ahead, and driving agreements and trying to get stuff done. You can argue about whether it's always good or bad, or whether it's imperialist or neo-imperialist, but they have been there. And what this administration has done is just walked away from that role completely, leaving a vacuum which is difficult to fill. Now Europe maybe could have filled it, but Europe, of course, is bogged down with Brexit and its own problems and trying to define what the future of Europe is. And again, in this crisis, we've seen Europe not acting with one voice at all. A tremendous lack of response by the European leadership. Japan is not really a candidate for leading anybody. They're managing okay, but their economy has been sluggish for a long time. So in this context, China is trying to say, well, we're doing quite well, thank you. I mean, the virus started in China and got out, but there's more cases in New York City now than there were in Wuhan. And the impact on New York City has been much worse than Wuhan, even though Wuhan is actually a bigger city. So I think what we're seeing is China kind of showing the world that they're actually able to handle stuff like this. And I think for many of the developing countries around the world, as they look around for a model, they might look to China as a better model of what to do. But this model has to do with state-owned capitalism. It has to do with surveillance on its people. It has to do with the power of the Communist Party. It's a complicated model to look at from our Western mind. But I think so. I think that's one of the things I heard, that in the Philippines, President Duterte, who's never been my favorite guy for a whole bunch of reasons, but he said, well, we tried the American model for a long time. It didn't get us very far. Let's try the Chinese as our new friends, and they're offering the One Belt, One Road. They're offering investment. So I think that's really the challenge of the next century is China offers its solution, and the West needs to somehow figure out a reaction to that.
Don't forget Nikita Khrushchev with his vote in United Nations claiming that the Soviet Union will will rule the world. Don't forget Paul Samuelson economic books where they say that by the end of the 20th century, the Soviet Union will be up there with United States as the leader of the world. This economy of China has been incredibly successful, growing from zero to what they are now. Still a poor country. We have to think if they are able to do this further growing now that they will have to create. Now they stop imitating, they stop copying. Now they will have to push the frontier of knowledge. Let's see if they are under authoritarian, to use a euphemism for dictatorship, an authoritarian government, they can do that. So I think that if emerging markets, the emerging countries follow the example of China and what is called today the Beijing consensus, they will be very much mistaken. I think that in order to have growth and entrepreneurial spirit, you need a liberal democracy, and they are not.
Pedro, I think that if you don't mind, I'm going to go to some of the questions from our audience. I think some of them are for you, some of them are, I think, for me, and some of them are kind of for us. So we'll just keep talking about these different issues, if that's all right. On this issue of global trade, and you mentioned, that the world should not go back to the 1930s. One of our people asks, what do you think will be the effect? Not what do you think should be or shouldn't be. What do you think will happen?
Oh, but I think that we have to fulfill the condition that WTO imposed to the country that joined to the world trade. And these conditions are to respect property right, to respect not to give subsidies to their company, etc., etc., etc. But I think that today in the American administration, there is a movement to say they are bringing us a virus, they are all this idea of closing our economy. If we do that as we did in 1930, will be a huge mistake. If we stop China to exporting their technology because we are afraid of what they can it will be a big mistake. The only way to compete, quote unquote, although countries do not compete, but the only way to compete with China is by the entrepreneurial capacity and innovation of the West, not closing China. And I think that we have to fight for that.
Do you think there is a tendency to close the markets, or do you think
Yes.
it's too early to say?
I think that this tendency to close the market, it's growing by economists like Peter Navarro in the White House today, or by intellectual like your friend that you mentioned, Neil Ferguson, that is claiming that we are in a Cold War, and they say we have to go and do the same that we did to the Soviet Union. We have to close any connection with them because it's better to have a second Cold War than a third hot World War. That's the argument. So this is a very dangerous argument, because if we are looking at China as a quote unquote the enemy, we might be moving toward a closed world, and globalization has brought huge wealth across the world.
Now, there's some very technical economic questions, Pedro, and if you don't mind, I'm trying to get them out of the way. It's about inflation. If governments around the world are printing money, that used to be a sin, because you print money, you get inflation. Now it seems we can print money, we don't get inflation. There's
Yes.
2 or 3 different questions which are asking about that.
We don't get inflation for many reasons. The first one, because this is technical, no? Although the monetary base M0 is growing, M2, M3 is not growing because banks are not lending the money. So this is the first one. You can see the excess reserve of the banking system in the United States. They are huge, and the same happened in Europe. That's why Draghi put a premium, a negative interest rate if you have excess reserve. That's the first reason. The second reason is because when we measure inflation, we're measuring consumer price inflation, but we don't measure the asset price inflation. So let's see how has been the impact of this incredible pumping of money in the United States and later in the European Union, in the stock prices, in the housing prices. These are asset prices that we don't measure when we measure inflation. And third, because this is Keynesian type of view. Sorry about it. We have some sort of liquidity trap, meaning the velocity of money has declined and the demand for money has increased. We are going to an uncertain future. If you want to walk into an uncertain future, you want to be liquid. So that's
liquid
why
meaning you want to have cash.
You want to have cash.
Or something similar to cash, and not have stuff buried in.
So these are the reasons. But don't worry, if we keep doing this thing, sooner or later we will see inflation. It will come.
It will come. Okay. Now this crisis on different things. So there's a bunch of questions, which is how does the crisis affect this? How does it affect that? How does it affect the other thing? One is this institutional framework, which they call Bretton Woods, the IMF, the World Bank, all of these different bodies. Will they survive this crisis?
It depends how they act. It depends if they are useful for anything. These things.
They're useful for anything?
Yeah. This institution.
You used to work at the World Bank, Pedro. Come on.
This institution started in Bretton Woods, small town in New Hampshire.
New Hampshire, yeah.
To reconstruct Europe. After the Marshall Plan was done, after reconstruction, they started trying to find new jobs, and that's how they are now in this situation. The IMF started to fulfill the Bretton Woods, and then so it depends. If they are not bringing any help for the emerging market in this tough situation, we will start to question not only this institution, but we will start to question institutions like the Euro system too.
Another question, Pedro, because you're from Chile. Will the Latin American democracies survive? Because
yes.
this crisis is hitting Latin America and will hit it pretty hard.
Yes, of course, because we are commodity export countries, and because in South America, not Latin America, I'm leaving Mexico outside. In South America, our main trade partner is China. and China. So this is a huge impact for these countries. But we have learned, I hope that we the Chile and Argentina, we have learned that dictatorship and bloody dictatorship like Pinochet and others are much worse than to have a democracy where we can complain about the economic situation and we have discussion how to improve it in the future.
There's a question which actually I had the same question to Nuria, and I think I saw the same question when I had Nuno on the show, which is this thing going to be a V-shaped crack or a U-shaped crack or an L-shape? Boom, and then it's flat for a long time. The question is from Alberto Alegre, and he says, I've thought it was going to be a V-shape, but this is getting kind of long, and are we moving to U or actually looking at L?
In the same way that when you talk about the real estate market, they say location, location, location. Now, if you want to discuss the shape of this, it's sectors, sector, sector. Tell me which sector you are. If you are in the airplane sector, airline sector, cruise sector, it's of course won't be a V shape. And maybe will be a very long U shape. If you are in another sector that can recover, it's a different thing. So as an economy, as a group, it depends how many of this sector you have. In Nuno, you discussed that we in Spain, 15%, almost 50%, it's tourism. So this sector will be hit heavily. So countries that have this type of sectors, where again, proximity is very relevant, they will be much affected. Other sectors that have industrial things. So that's how we can, but of course, nobody knows this stuff. If I knew, I wouldn't be here. That's it.
Well, you're in your house and I'm in my house. I don't know where we'd be. About airlines, because airlines have been hard hit, of course, but the price of fuel has dropped so much. Yeah, so maybe there's a silver lining for airlines.
But 90% of the passengers are not there. So
but they'll come back. I mean,
well, we will see. What we have to do, though, the government has to make sure that we don't subsidize them. We don't give money out of this. Mr. Richard Branson, that lives in an island in the Caribbean and doesn't pay taxes, now he's asking for $3 billion to the British government in subsidies to that. The subsidies have to go to people that need it. If you give money to companies, the shareholder of the company will get the money, not the workers. So we have to be very careful on this thing. There's no question for you, Mike.
No, all the questions are for you. I mean, there's a bunch of questions on the East-West relationship in China and the U.S. Questions about whether Trump won the trade war. Questions about how this thing's going to play out. My own view is I don't know if you remember the story about the American aircraft carrier in Hawaii. Yeah. The captain was worried because he had a breakout of COVID-19 on the ship, and he wanted to put all the sailors on shore. The ship was in active duty, but he says we're in peace, so just let me shut the ship down and make sure everybody's safe. And they told him no, so he sent an email to a bunch of his officers. He went around his boss and said, I really think we should do this. That got leaked to the press. And then they fired him, and then the Secretary of the Navy got, that just shows that American leadership, American resolve in this time of crisis isn't really where it needs to be. That's the kind of thing which sends a message to everyone saying, hey, we're not in control of this thing, and you have to be. You see that happening, and then you might say, well, gee, who can I go to? Which is where people might go to China. Countries might go to China to say, hey, can you help us? And I think the Chinese and the Russians have been very proactive of saying, hey, we can help, sending supplies and sending masks and this kind of stuff. So I think there is a window of opportunity, but I think you're also right in saying that it's not over yet. These things take a long time to play out. And China's armed forces are nothing compared to, Chinese Navy is nothing compared to the American Navy. They have a lot of soldiers under arms, but I'm not sure they are quite as capable as they could be. So when we start to see real stuff, the future of Taiwan, um, I think it's way too soon to say how this is going to play out from a geopolitical point of view, even if in the medium term there might be some serious economic impact. At least that's my view on those questions.
Yes, yeah. But what do you think about what China this last weekend in Hong Kong, going and dropping down all while we're worried about the coronavirus, they went and took all the leaders of this. Do you think that Taiwan would be willing to enjoy and have one country, three system? Well,
I mean, China's policy and Mr. Xi's policy is the eventual reunification of Taiwan with the rest of China. And our MBA students coming from the mainland consider Taiwan to be the 19th province of China. Now, our Taiwanese students, they see the world very, very differently, and they don't trust anything coming from China. It's a very complicated time, and I think that's another thing which this crisis has shown us is we kind of get into our little bubble of feeling everything's great, and we have our plans, and we have our companies and our the way we're doing business and what we plan for our families, and we just don't look at plan B. We don't look at what might happen, what might go wrong. We elect politicians because we like their face, or they agree with one issue, and we don't think about how strong these people might be, if things get complicated or even nasty. And I think one of the things this is teaching us, and the good news is, teaching us with a crisis, which is while it's with an illness, which while it's devastating for many people, it's not as bad as others. It could be Ebola. This is so maybe we're learning a lesson, and I think Noel Yuval Harari, from the guy who wrote *Sapiens* and *Homo Deus*, he said we're coming to a fork in the road, sort of. Will we embrace globalization, openness, transparency, and build on the amazing spontaneous neighborliness and helpfulness that people have been showing in this crazy time? Or will we take a different road towards building higher walls, more surveillance, and more fear? And that, I think, is the central question of our day.
And how do you think that this crisis will play in the coming election in the United States? Do you think that Mr. Trump will be reelected, or this can be very dangerous for him? What do you think about that?
Boy, it's hard for me to get any. I mean, I wrote 8 blog posts explaining why Trump could never be elected in the first place. So I was wrong about his election last time. And the New York Times today, there's a very nice article talking about Republicans, the Republican polling data being very, very negative, especially in certain states. If you remember in the American election,
yes.
I last place I lived in the U.S. is Massachusetts. Massachusetts will vote for Joe Biden or any other Democrat. Someone from I don't know, Alabama will vote for Donald Trump or any other Republican. So the real question is what happens in Florida, Michigan, Ohio, et cetera, what we call the swing states. And the most likely scenario is Biden will take as a running mate someone like the governor of Michigan, who's a lady, fantastic, solid citizen, great governor. And I think he's going to win. I think Biden will win as long as he stays healthy. I think the mismanagement of this administration, I'll let you answer that question because everybody knows what I think is, and I think he's going to get blamed for making a lot of bad decisions and saying a lot of crazy stuff on television. The president of the United States telling people they should inject bleach. I mean, what do you make of that? You're not from the States, so you might have a different point of view, but it just boggles the mind.
Yeah. Well, we will see. We will see how this is becoming, this impact of the virus. We will see what will happen. We have already some idea that when we have a crisis in an election year, we have big swings. So we will see what will happen this time.
Yeah, another question here for me is about Russia and Saudi Arabia with the price of oil so low, because one of the issues is, with the oil price so low, some of these countries will not have enough money to pay their expenses. Venezuela is in deep trouble,
Yes.
despite the fact that it's got the wrong guy as the president, and Mr. Guaido has not been able to take power, but it's in deep trouble. Saudi Arabia, I understand, is not in a great place, but has some reserves. Russia, I've been told, has extraordinarily deep reserves and can run at low oil prices for a significant period of time. That might be why they allowed this price war to start in the first place. I guess it went out of control. So I think Russia might be okay. I think Saudi Arabia, they might not have much money to build their new city of the future and to do some of the kind of farther out stuff that Mohammed bin Salman was planning. But it's not clear that anybody else is in better shape. So if you think about the conflict between Saudi Arabia and Iran, Iran is not doing so much better that it can take advantage of the situation. So I think everything is kind of complicated in that part of the world. Pedro, there's a question about Europe, future of Europe. Spain and Italy, Euro bonds. Someone called it. Someone asked a question the other day about COVID bonds. What are COVID Euro bonds? Is this the idea that we should bail out the southern economies with bonds at German interest rates? Is that the basic idea?
The basic idea that we are in a common political and economic area, and there are some people that are suffering a huge shock, a negative shock, and they need help. Italy, it will be very difficult for Italy to pay its debt if the interest rate goes up as they were going up before Mrs. Lagarde made the announcement that we'll start buying the bonds. So they just need help. So how to create this help? It's a good way to do it is through some sort of transitory help to these countries, not a permanent help. So there are some politicians that want mutualization of the debt. No, it's how we can help this country in a transitory way, how we can help us in a transitory way to come out of this. Until now, we don't see much willingness from the center to help the periphery. And this is a big mistake. And the mistake is from both sides. From the center claiming that we don't help these guys because they spend their money in drinking, like a socialist Dutch minister say, or the other guy say, I need solidarity. No, we need this because this is good for you guys in the center. Because with this union, what we want to avoid is the history of Europe of last century. There's nothing to be happy about the history of Europe of last century. And this is a political project. And we have to keep this political project because at this level has been extremely successful. Maybe we don't need the euro. The euro is not part of the political project. So we can question that. But the European Union is the political project that gives us stability and peace to this century, and we hope that it will continue in the future. So it's just a matter of survival and having a better life for Europe. And so the issue is how this help can be managed. There are people like Soros, and even the proposal of the Spanish government is to issue perpetual bonds, so they don't have to be paid. So that will be a good at the low interest rate. That will be not a big cost for.
Sorry. What's a perpetual bond? You never have to pay it back?
No, you just pay the interest rate. You kick it to the future. So consoles are.
We used to call those a balloon mortgage, right? It's just.
Yeah, but that's at the mortgage level. This at the government level. So there are this idea, which is not a bad idea. But we, of course, should be no doubt to anybody that the European leaders are underestimating the risk of Italy.
Here's a question I'd like to come to, which is about the sustainable development goals, because you and I have spent a lot of time talking about the SDGs, and before the crisis, we started a whole initiative on that. The question is should they be reconsidered or maybe even abandoned? My answer would be no. My answer, they're more important than ever. Maybe instead of 2030, maybe we should shift to 2033 or something. But my opinion is we need to double down on that commitment for human progress. I do think it needs to go hand in hand with the transition to a low carbon economy. I don't think we can meet the SDGs and give everybody in India electric lights and sanitation without using innovative technological solutions. Because if all we do is make the whole world have the Western lifestyle, we're gonna crash the planet with pollution and climate change. But what do you think about that?
No, I totally agree with you. This is a fat tail black swan. What's the meaning of fat tail? That is multiplicative, meaning there are people that are arguing more people die from a car accident than from coronavirus, so we should not care. Well, but this is totally different experiment. When somebody in Wuhan has a car accident, that doesn't create a car accident in the United States. But here is multiplicative thing. So we have to prepare, but we have to prepare in a smart way. We cannot force the world into lockdown permanent to fulfill this. So I totally agree with you. So we have to foster and to give the incentive to move away from some type of technologies. Last year, they asked economics professor in United States about if they agree or not in a tax to carbon, 100% say yes. From different schools, from right, and so these are the incentives. These are the incentives. It has to be in the system.
My understanding is ExxonMobil has been planning for a $60 tax on carbon for years.
I don't know about that, but it's clear that the price of carbon, if this thing exists, and we want to hedge this risk, the price of oil that we see in the gas station is not the right one.
And we're definitely going to have to do that if oil is going to still be $20 a barrel. We're going to have to put some kind of disincentive into the system in order to compensate. We have a couple of questions on where they go. Someone's asking about Joe Biden. I'm just going to answer this. The question is, is Joe Biden the leader the world needs right now? He's a solid man with strong values and a clear head, and he's not going to say things which aren't true, and he's not going to do silly things. And I think to some degree that might be the kind of leadership we need right now. I do think he's going to have to pick a running mate, a vice president who's energetic, who's younger, who's a lady, who gives a sense of, because the guy is 77 years old, and he may not be able to be fully on board for 4 or let alone 8 years. So I think it's important that there is American leadership.
I will answer to that question, Mike, with this line of this famous joke. Compared to whom? No, so if Biden, but it's a good leader to compare to whom. So this is
and Sven is asking about this social media, the pervasive fear and people selling fear and spreading it around, and as kind of a new part of our global system as we look at it.
Yes. Oh, this is very dangerous because the people that love Big Brother take advantage of this fear to take our freedom. So the liberals, in the good sense of the word, the European sense of the word, of this world, we have to be careful that the government doesn't take our freedom because it's scaring us with all these type of things. One thing that we react to this issue, and the other in a transitory way. I'm willing to be at my home 60, 90, 80 days because I believe that what the experts are telling me is right. But I'm not willing to this be imposed constraint on my freedom to the future. So the liberals of the world, watch out. We have to be prepared because the government will try. That's happened in September 11 with the Patriot Act. That's happened in many other parts of the world. Like claiming, I will take care of you. Don't worry. No, I don't want anybody taking care of me. So we have to be really aware of this.
Pedro, thanks so much for doing this session. We actually planned this a month and a half ago because we were kind of thinking we'd be coming out of this thing by now. And we're starting to see some signs that the world is opening up again.
Yes.
Um, for those of you, tomorrow we have a session with Javier Estrada. He'll be talking about financial markets. I saw that, Omar, you asked about financial markets and what's going to happen in the stock market. We're going to talk about that tomorrow. We have some more sessions lined up this week, but starting next week, you'll start to see a different kind of session. We're going to be starting to bring in CEOs from different companies, and different professors will be interviewing them to talk about how they're opening up the world, what kind of steps we can take after the crisis. To use the words of one CEO from a big company based here in Barcelona, we've been talking about the now, we've been talking about tomorrow, but now we really have to start thinking about the day after tomorrow. Remember that this session is also available taped. You can watch it on LinkedIn. You can watch it on the IESE website. You can watch it on our YouTube channel and on Guardia. So if you're interested in sending it to someone, this session is taped, as are all our sessions. Pedro, we're out of time. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you. Thank you.
And thanks everybody for tuning in from wherever you are. And we'll see you next time.